Owen tightened the last bolt under the hood of the beat-up car, exhaling heavily as he wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The scorching summer heat bore down on him, but he barely noticed anymore. This was just another day at the small auto shop. He ran in the corner of town, the same shop that barely paid the bills, barely kept food on the table for his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. He straightened up, rolling his sore shoulders, when he heard the jarring sound of a car sputtering to a halt just outside the garage. The vehicle barely made it into the lot before it gave up completely, the engine coughing out one final breath. Owen sighed, grabbed a rag to clean his hands, and walked over. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman tall, poised and stunning in a way that made Owen's breath hitch for half a second. Her long, dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and despite the irritation on her face, there was an undeniable elegance to her. "Car trouble?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. She blew out a frustrated breath. "You could say that. It just died out of nowhere." Owen nodded, crouching down to glance at the tires before motioning for her to pop the hood. "Let's take a look." The woman hesitated for a second, then leaned into the car and pulled the lever. Owen propped the hood open and immediately spotted the problem. "Your alternator's shot." "Battery's barely holding on," she groaned. "Fantastic," he glanced at her. "I can fix it, but it'll take a little time." She exhaled, clearly annoyed, but nodded. "Fine. Do whatever you need to do." Owen got to work, ignoring the way she crossed her arms and tapped her foot impatiently. He wasn't in the mood for attitude, but a job was a job. While he worked, Lily ran out of the back office, her blonde curls bouncing. "Daddy, can we have grilled cheese for dinner?" she asked, clinging to his arm. Owen chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Sure, sweetheart." The woman watched them with an unreadable expression. "Your daughter," Owen nodded, not looking up. "Yeah, Lily." Lily grinned up at the woman. "Hi. Are you a princess?" The woman blinked in surprise before laughing a real, genuine laugh that softened her entire face. "No, not a princess." Lily frowned as if she didn't believe her. "You look like one." Owen shook his head, amused. "Okay, kiddo, go finish your coloring." Lily ran off, and the woman glanced back at Owen. "She's adorable. Thanks." He tightened the last bolt and wiped his hands on a towel, good as new. The woman checked the engine and then turned back to him. "How much do I owe you?" Owen hesitated. He could have charged her a fortune, especially given the designer shoes she was wearing, but something about her made him hold back. "Just pay for the part." 200 should cover it." She gave him a strange look, as if she couldn't believe he wasn't trying to overcharge her. Then, she reached into her bag and handed him the cash. "Thanks," she said, softer this time. Owen nodded. "Drive safe." She hesitated before getting into her car, then, just before she drove away, she rolled down the window. "I'm Dahlia, by the way." Owen gave a small nod. "Owen." Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and something else, a feeling. A strange, lingering feeling that something about her wasn't what it seemed. Dahlia drove down the road, gripping the steering wheel, her heart still racing in her chest. Owen had no idea who she really was. No idea that she wasn't just some woman with car trouble. She was Dahlia Whitmore, billionaire heiress, CEO, and one of the most powerful women in the country. And for the first time in a long time, she'd met a man who didn't care about any of that. Dahlia sat in the back of her town car, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. Normally, she would have been driven everywhere in one of her sleek luxury vehicles, but today had been different. Today, she'd been stranded in a small town auto shop with grease-stained concrete and the faint scent of motor oil clinging to the air, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. Or more specifically about him. Owen, the mechanic with tired eyes and a steady, calloused grip. He hadn't asked who she was, hadn't treated her like some business mogul or heiress. He'd just been a man doing his job, fixing her car with quiet efficiency. And then there was his daughter Lily, with her bouncing curls and wide, curious eyes. Dahlia exhaled, leaning back against the plush leather seat. Her life had never been simple, despite what the world thought. Being born into the Whitmore empire meant she'd never had to worry about money, but it had also meant she'd spent her entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Fake smiles, empty promises, shallow affection, it was all she'd ever known. But Owen, he didn't even know who she was. As the car pulled up to the towering glass building of Whitmore Enterprises, Dahlia forced herself to shake off the lingering thoughts. She had a company to run. Inside, her assistant, Emily, was already waiting. "The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, Emily informed her, keeping pace as Dahlia strode toward her office. "There's also a dinner with the partners from Tokyo later this evening, and your father called twice." Dahlia stifled a sigh. Of course he did. Her father, Richard Whitmore, never called just to check in. If he was trying to reach her, it meant he wanted something. She pushed open the double doors to her office, the skyline stretching wide beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a stunning view, a reminder of everything she had built. But today, it felt suffocating. The meeting was a blur of numbers and projections, discussions of acquisitions and market trends. Dahlia handled it with practiced ease, her voice sharp and commanding. Yet beneath it all, a thought lingered. Would Owen even recognize her in this setting? By the time the dinner rolled around, Dahlia had had enough of business. She wanted a break from the high-stakes world she lived in, from the expectations that came with her last name. And so, instead of attending the dinner, she found herself driving back toward that small auto shop on the outskirts of town. It was a reckless decision, completely unlike her. But something inside her needed to see him again. When she pulled up, the garage was still open, though the sky had darkened. Owen was leaning against a workbench, talking to Lily, who sat on a stool swinging her legs. They hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, Dahlia just watched. Lily was laughing at something he said, her face lighting up with unfiltered joy. The sight sent a strange warmth through Dahlia's chest. Then Owen looked up, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her. "You again," he remarked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Car acting up already," she hesitated before stepping closer. "No." "It's fine," he raised an eyebrow. "Then what brings you back?" Dahlia wasn't sure how to answer that. She had no reason to be here, no real excuse. But instead of fabricating some logical explanation, she simply said, "I wanted to say thank you. Again." Owen studied her for a moment before nodding. "You already paid me." "You don't owe me anything." "I know." Something about the way he spoke, so simple, so matter-of-fact, unnerved her. She was used to men looking at her with expectation, waiting for an opportunity to impress her. Owen, on the other hand, seemed entirely unmoved by her presence. Lily grinned at her. "You came back," Dahlia smiled. "I did. Do you like grilled cheese?" the little girl asked suddenly. Owen shot his daughter a look. "Lily, what?" Lily blinked innocently. "She looks like she needs dinner." Dahlia laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "I do, actually." Owen exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck before finally giving in. "Fine. One extra grilled cheese." The next thing she knew, she was sitting at a small, worn wooden table in the back office of the shop, a plate of grilled cheese sandwiches in front of her. It was the most unpolished, unrefined meal she'd had in years. And yet, it was oddly perfect. Lily chattered away, filling the silence with stories about school and the stray cat that sometimes wandered near the garage. Dahlia listened, charmed by the little girl's energy. Owen, however, remained quiet, his gaze flicking to Dahlia occasionally as if trying to figure her out. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "You don't seem like the kind of person who usually eats in auto shops." Dahlia met his gaze, the corner of her lips lifting slightly. "You'd be right. So why are you here?" She hesitated. How could she explain it? That she was tired of the world she lived in. That, for once, she wanted to be somewhere real. Instead, she said, "Maybe I just like the company." Owen didn't respond right away, but something in his expression shifted, like he wasn't sure what to make of her. Lily, on the other hand, beamed. Then you should come back again. Dahlia glanced at Owen, waiting to see if he would protest. He didn't. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't just Dahlia Whitmore, billionaire CEO. She was just a woman, sitting in a garage, eating grilled cheese with a man and his daughter. And it felt right. Dahlia never intended to return to the auto shop again after that second visit. It had been a reckless indulgence, a fleeting moment where she could pretend to be someone without an empire resting on her shoulders. But as the days passed, she found herself thinking about Owen and Lily more than she cared to admit. The warmth of that simple dinner, the ease of their company, the way Owen had looked at her without expectation, it lingered in her mind like an unfinished sentence. So when her driver pulled up to Whitmore Enterprises one afternoon, and she found herself dreading another evening of boardroom discussions and corporate dinners, she made a snap decision. "Take me back to the garage," she said. The driver hesitated, clearly surprised, but nodded and changed course. When she arrived, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the shop. The garage door was open, revealing Owen working beneath the hood of a truck. His navy t-shirt was streaked with grease, his strong arms flexing with each movement. Lily sat on a stool nearby, animatedly reading from a book, her voice rising and falling with dramatic flair. Dahlia stepped out of the car, and almost immediately Lily noticed her. "You came back," the little girl exclaimed, hopping off her seat and running toward her. Owen looked up then, his expression unreadable, but he didn't seem surprised. "You really don't have much car trouble for someone who keeps showing up at an auto shop." Dahlia let out a soft laugh. "Maybe I just like the atmosphere." Lily tugged on her hand. "Daddy made spaghetti tonight, you should stay." Dahlia hesitated, glancing at Owen. His gaze met hers, steady and assessing, before he gave a slow nod. "Fine," he said. "But if you're staying, you're helping with the dishes." She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her like that, like she was just another person, not someone powerful or untouchable. Inside the small kitchen, the three of them sat around the table, the scent of garlic and tomatoes filling the air. The food was simple, but it was rich with flavor, and Dahlia found herself savoring every bite. Lily talked endlessly about her day, about a school project, about how she wanted to be an astronaut and a veterinarian at the same time. Dahlia listened with genuine interest, drawn into the little girl's world. Owen, however, was quieter. He observed Dahlia with a guarded expression, as if trying to figure out why she kept returning. Finally, as they stood at the sink washing dishes, he spoke. "You're not just here for the food," he said, his voice low. Dahlia rinsed a plate and set it aside. "No, I'm not." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Then why?" She hesitated, the weight of her real life pressing against her, but something about Owen made her want to be honest. "Because this is the first place I've been in a long time where no one expects anything from me," she admitted. His gaze didn't waver. "That doesn't sound like a bad thing." "It's not," she agreed. "It's just different." Owen studied her for a moment, then dried his hands and reached for a bottle of water from the fridge. "You come from money, don't you?" Most people would have danced around the question, hesitant to bring it up, but Owen was direct, cutting to the truth like a blade. Dahlia tensed slightly. "What makes you say that?" "You carry yourself like someone used to being in charge," he said simply. "And your clothes." "Yeah, they don't exactly scream small-town local," she exhaled, setting down the dish she was drying. "You're right." Owen didn't look surprised, but he also didn't look impressed. He just nodded. "Doesn't change anything," he said after a beat. Dahlia blinked. "It doesn't," he shook his head. "You're still just a woman who keeps showing up at my shop, eating my food, and making my daughter think she's got a new best friend." A strange warmth spread through her chest. "Is that a bad thing?" Owen's lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "Haven't decided yet." Lily came running in then, holding a handful of paper and crayons. "Dahlia, will you color with me?" Dahlia let out a soft laugh. "Of course." As she sat on the floor with Lily, scribbling with crayons on printer paper, she felt content. It was a foreign feeling, one she hadn't realized she was missing. Owen watched them from the kitchen, his expression unreadable. And Dahlia knew in that moment that she wasn't ready to walk away from this just yet. Dahlia had no plans of staying in Owen's life for long. At least, that's what she told herself. She had spent years building walls around her heart, learning to navigate a world where love was a transaction and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But something about the way Owen looked at her like she was just a woman, not a billionaire, not a CEO, made her want to tear down every carefully placed brick. She had never felt anything like this before, never allowed herself to. And yet, she kept coming back. Days turned into weeks, and Dahlia found herself woven into the fabric of Owen and Lily's life in a way that terrified and thrilled her. Evenings at the auto shop turned into shared dinners. Trips to grab supplies became an excuse to spend more time together. And the quiet moments, the ones that snuck up on her when she least expected them, became the ones she cherished most. Like the night, Owen caught her staring at the stars outside the garage after Lily had fallen asleep in the office. He had leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that sent warmth curling through her chest. "You don't get to see the stars much where you're from, do you?" His voice was low, steady. Dahlia shook her head. "Too many city lights." Owen stepped closer, standing beside her in the cool night air. "Seems like a shame." She glanced at him, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't quite understand. It is. Something passed between them then, something unspoken and undeniable. He was so close she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes darkened in the dim light. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like Dahlia Whitmore, the woman with an empire to run. She just felt like Dahlia. But reality had a way of creeping in, no matter how hard she tried to hold it back. The first crack in their fragile world came when her father found out where she had been spending her time. Richard Whitmore was not a man who tolerated surprises. When Dahlia walked into his office one afternoon, he was already waiting, a newspaper spread out on his desk. A grainy photo of her standing outside Owen's garage stared back at her. "You've been slumming it in a mechanic's shop." His voice was calm, but she knew better than to mistake it for indifference. Dahlia lifted her chin. "I've been spending time with someone who doesn't care about my last name," her father exhaled sharply. "That's exactly the problem." She clenched her fists. "You don't even know him." "I don't need to." He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "You think this man isn't going to change the second he finds out who you really are? That he won't see an opportunity when it presents itself?" Owen's face flashed in her mind the way he had looked at her, the way he had never once asked about her past or pressed her for details about her life. He wasn't like that. He couldn't be. But her father's words planted a seed of doubt, one she couldn't quite shake. She left the office feeling like a storm was brewing inside her, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to weather it. When she arrived at the shop that evening, Owen was there, working beneath the hood of a car. He looked up as she stepped inside, wiping his hands on a rag. "You look like you've got something on your mind," he observed. Dahlia hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing against her ribs. She had never told him who she really was. Part of her had wanted to, had almost done it a dozen times, but she had been scared. Scared that everything between them would change. But wasn't that what she had wanted all along? For someone to love her for who she was, not what she had. She took a breath. "Owen, I need to tell you something." He set the rag down, his expression unreadable. "All right." She swallowed hard. "I haven't been completely honest with you." His brows furrowed slightly, but he said nothing, waiting. "My last name is Whitmore," she admitted, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "As in Whitmore Enterprises." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Owen exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "That explains a lot." Dahlia's stomach dropped. "You're not angry." Owen ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. I don't know what I am right now, Dahlia. He let out a slow breath. I wish you'd told me sooner. I was afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid that you'd look at me differently, that everything between us would change. Owen studied her for a long moment. I don't care about your last name, but I do care that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. The words hit harder than she expected. I do trust you, she said softly. Owen held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding. Then prove it. The next day she did. She invited him and Lily to her world. A charity gala, the kind filled with flashing cameras and men in tailored suits who measured power in dollar signs. She wanted him to see all of it and know that despite everything, she still wanted him. Owen had been reluctant at first, but in the end, he showed up in a crisp black suit, looking so effortlessly handsome that she forgot how to breathe for a moment. Lily, dressed in a pale blue dress, twirled excitedly beside him. This is like a fairy tale, Dahlia smiled. It kind of is. The night was a whirlwind of whispered conversations and champagne, of people eyeing Owen with curiosity. But he never wavered. He stood by her side, solid and steady, as if he belonged there all along. And when the evening drew to a close and they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. So, what happens now? He asked. Dahlia reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Now, we stop pretending this is temporary. Owen studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then, without another word, he pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't a hesitant kiss, wasn't filled with uncertainty or lingering doubt. It was deep, consuming, the kind that left no room for questions. And in that moment, Dahlia knew without a doubt that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not wealth. Not power. Love. Real, undeniable, earth-shifting love, and she was never letting it go. Dahlia had never been so sure of anything in her entire life. As she stood beside Owen on the grand balcony overlooking the city, the weight of her world pressing against the edges of their quiet moment, she knew this was it. This was what she had been missing. Not the money, not the power, not the endless cycle of high-stakes business deals and corporate maneuvering. None of it had ever truly mattered. Owen did. Lily did. They were real in a way nothing else in her life had ever been. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next. But the world wasn't ready to let her have her happiness so easily. The morning after the gala, when she arrived at Whitmore Enterprises, she was met with a storm. Her father was waiting for her in her office, seated behind her desk as if he owned the space which, technically, he did. Richard Whitmore had built an empire with a ruthlessness that had made their family name untouchable. But today, he wasn't just the shrewd billionaire tycoon. He was a father who believed he was protecting his daughter. He dropped a thick folder onto the desk in front of her. "Read it." Dahlia didn't move. "What is it?" "Everything you need to know about Owen Carter." Her stomach twisted, but she refused to show it. "You had him investigated." Richard leaned back in the chair, folding his hands together. "You left me no choice. You're making reckless decisions, Dahlia. You're attaching yourself to a man with nothing to offer you." Her jaw clenched. "He's not some opportunist." Her father's expression didn't change. "No." "Then why didn't he tell you about his debts?" Dahlia inhaled sharply. "What?" Richard gestured to the folder. "Medical bills, legal fees." "He's drowning in expenses from a custody battle with his late wife's family. He's barely keeping his business afloat." Her hands curled into fists. "That doesn't mean anything." "He's a single father doing his best. He's not after my money." Richard's gaze sharpened. "Then why hasn't he told you any of this?" Dahlia's heart pounded. She wanted to argue, to push back against the insinuation, but the truth settled uncomfortably in her mind. Owen had never mentioned any of it, and she had never asked. She turned on her heel and walked out of the office, ignoring her father's voice calling after her. By the time she reached the auto shop, her pulse was racing. Owen was outside, working beneath the hood of a sedan, his shirt clinging to his back from the heat of the afternoon sun. He straightened when he saw her approaching, wiping his hands on a rag. Something in her expression must have given her away because his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" Dahlia didn't hesitate. "Why didn't you tell me?" Owen's stance stiffened. "Tell you what?" She swallowed hard. "About the debts, the legal fees, everything you've been dealing with." His jaw tightened. "How do you know about that?" Dahlia exhaled. "My father had you investigated." Owen's expression darkened. "Of course he did." She stepped closer. "Owen, I don't care about the money. I don't care about any of it. But I need to know why you didn't tell me." He looked away, running a hand through his hair. "Because it's not your problem, Dahlia. I didn't want you to think." He cut himself off. "Think what?" she pressed. "That I was with you for what you have." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I never wanted you to question that." Dahlia's heart ached. "I wouldn't have." Owen exhaled slowly, his eyes searching hers. "I've spent my whole life fighting to stand on my own. I didn't want you to see me as someone who needed saving." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You don't need saving. But you don't have to do this alone either." His grip tightened around hers, and for the first time she saw something crack in his resolve. "I love you, Owen," she whispered. "Not because I can fix your problems, not because I have money. I love you because of who you are." Owen swallowed hard. Then, without another word, he pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her as if he never wanted to let go. It was the only answer she needed. 3 weeks later, Dahlia stood outside the garage with Lily, watching as Owen locked up for the night. Lily beamed. "Are we going to the surprise now?" Dahlia laughed. "Yes, sweetheart." "We're going now." Owen shot her a suspicious glance. "What surprise?" She simply took his hand and led him to the car. When they arrived at their destination, a sleek, fully renovated auto shop on the other side of town, Owen froze. Dahlia turned to him, her heart pounding. "I bought it for you." He stared at her. "Dahlia," she shook her head. "No, listen, this isn't charity. This is an investment in you, in your future. I know how much you love what you do. And I know how hard it's been to keep your shop running, so now you don't have to worry anymore." Owen's throat worked as he took it all in. "You did this for me," she smiled softly. "I did this for us, for Lily, for the life we're building together." He exhaled, then pulled her against him, pressing a deep, lingering kiss to her lips. Lily giggled. "Does this mean we're going to be a family now?" Owen and Dahlia both turned to look at her, and without hesitation, Owen scooped his daughter into his arms. "We already are," he said. Dahlia felt tears sting her eyes. She had spent her whole life searching for something real, and finally she had found it. Owen stood in the middle of the gleaming new auto shop, the scent of fresh paint and polished steel filling the air. The space was pristine, larger than his old garage, with state-of-the-art equipment he never could have afforded on his own. It was everything he had dreamed of, yet none of it compared to the woman standing beside him. Dahlia watched him carefully, waiting for his reaction. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is really mine," she nodded, her fingers laced together. "Ours." Owen exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't have to do this." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I wanted to." He studied her, searching for any trace of pity, any sign that she saw him as a charity case. But all he found in her eyes was unwavering belief in him. Something inside him cracked then, the last remnants of the walls he had spent years building. He reached for her, pulling her against him, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Dahlia melted into him, her arms wrapping around his waist. "You deserve this, Owen. You and Lily deserve something stable, something that isn't a constant struggle." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "I don't love you because of what you can give me." She smiled softly. "I know, and that's why I love you." Lily's excited voice broke the moment. She had been darting between the workstations, taking in every detail of the shop like it was a playground. "Does this mean Daddy's gonna fix even more cars now?" Owen chuckled, ruffling her hair. "It means I can finally do things the way I've always wanted." Dahlia grinned. and I already have customers lined up. There are people who would love to bring their cars here, especially once they see the quality of your work." He gave her a look, amused. "You're already turning this into a business plan, aren't you?" She shrugged. "I can't help it. I see potential and I make things happen." Owen shook his head, but there was affection in his gaze. "I guess I better get ready for an influx of luxury cars." Lily tugged on Dahlia's hand. "Can I help too? I can hand Daddy his tools." Dahlia crouched down in front of her. "Absolutely. Every great mechanic needs a great assistant." Lily beamed, bouncing on her toes. Owen watched them, something warm settling in his chest. This was his family, his life. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what came next. Days passed, and the shop officially opened under its new name, Carter & Co., Auto Repair. The name was Owen's idea, a subtle acknowledgement that this wasn't just his shop anymore. It was a legacy in the making. Customers rolled in, some regulars from his old garage, others drawn in by word of mouth. Dahlia had been right. People were eager to bring their cars to a shop with high-end service and an honest reputation. But what truly surprised him was how seamlessly Dahlia fit into his world. She had traded sleek business suits for comfortable jeans and rolled-up sleeves, diving into the operations with the same efficiency she applied to billion-dollar deals. She handled logistics, finances, and scheduling, allowing Owen to focus on what he did best. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that made it seem like they had been doing this for years. One evening, after closing up, they sat outside the shop, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. Lily had fallen asleep on a makeshift cot in the office, exhausted from a day of helping. Dahlia leaned against Owen's shoulder, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his arm. "I never thought I'd be happy in a place like this." Owen glanced at her. "And now," she smiled, tilting her head to look at him, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He turned, cupping her face in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You changed everything, Dahlia." "So did you," she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring every unspoken emotion into the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Dahlia sighed contentedly. "You know, I think Lily might be right." Owen arched a brow. "About what?" She grinned. "This does feel like a fairy tale," he chuckled, pulling her closer. "Then I guess it's only fitting that we get our happily ever after." And with that, under the vast night sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, they did.